What's going on? Merry Christmas. I'm recording this on Christmas. What better time to talk about something called the gift exchange economy? I want to discuss other ways of living that are positive, that have existed and still exist today. One of the problems that people have when trying to overcome a systemic trouble, especially our economic struggle under capitalism, is that people fail to have a vision of something beyond the capitalist paradigm. Our economic paradigm, it's very hard for people to see anything outside of it, to envision anything other than what we're living in, as if this is a natural order of things and how human existence has always been, which is just not the case. For much of human history, we've had various kinds of economies, and one of those economies is called the gift exchange economy, or the gift economy. I also want to discuss not only a gift economy, but in the same vein, just the spirit of cooperation and giving in general that has existed. The first book is The Invention of Capitalism by Michael Perlman, and this book is really fascinating. It's exactly what the title says, The Invention of Capitalism. It takes you back to essentially Europe before 17th century and before. 17th century is about where capitalism formed, and before that he discusses how we got to that point, what were the processes that got us to that point. So this discussed how many places were before the capitalists began the process of what's actually called primitive accumulation. It essentially is the process of separating people from their means of production that forced them into wage labor, taking away their means of sustaining themselves, taking away their self-sufficiency, which forced them into wage labor. That's primitive accumulation. But this section is going to give a glimpse into the life of the common people before that happened. Chapter 1, The Enduring Importance of Primitive Accumulation. Common fields and pastures kept alive a vigorous cooperative spirit in the community. Enclosures starved it. In Champion, she looks like a grammatical error here. In Champion, country people had to work together amicably to agree upon crop rotations, stints of common pasture, the upkeep and improvement of their grazings and meadows, the clearing of the ditches, the fencing of the fields. They toiled side by side in the fields, and they walked together from field to village, from farm to heath, morning, afternoon, and evening. They all depended on common resources for their fuel, for bedding, and fodder for their stock, and by pooling so many of the necessities of livelihood, they were disciplined from early youth to submit to the rules and customs of the community. After enclosure, when every man could fence his own piece of territory and warn his neighbors off, the discipline of sharing things fairly with one's neighbors was relaxed, and every household became an island unto itself. This was the great revolution in men's lives, greater than all economic changes following enclosure. Yet few people living in this world bequeathed to us by the enclosing and improving farmer are capable of gauging the full significance of a way of life that is now lost. And that was apparently by Joan Thirsk. Okay, so this is from an article, Candiaronk's Wisdom, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Indigenous Criticism, The Myth of Progress and the Birth of the Left. Indigenous Wisdom. David Graeber and David Wengrow worked on a project together devoted to the history of inequalities. One of the things deals with the influence of Amerindian societies on Enlightenment thinkers in the West. It appears that the founding texts of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution, and in particular Rousseau's text on the origin of inequality among men, were strongly influenced by books which related the criticism of the American Indians vis-a-vis to Western society. Among these American Indians, Kandiarak's personality stands out as that of a sort of Native American Socrates, a brilliant orator who fascinated the French Western elite and who perverted Western youth as his criticisms of Western society and of the Christian religion spread within the aforesaid society. The text shows that the ideology of progress then appears as a conservative reaction against the dissemination of these ideas in order to justify Western inequalities, since, according to this ideology, the inequality of men would be the price to pay for technical progress and the comfort that it brings. So the myth that inequality is the price to pay for technical progress, and also books written by Western elites to essentially try and fight against the influence of the American Indians' critique of the West. Now, this next thing will also discuss communism. Communism is perfect when discussing a sharing and cooperative economy. In fact, communism comes from the word community. And I'm happy to discuss this because most people don't really know what communism is. We only know what communism is from propaganda, Western propaganda about it. So here's a good intro to it. Frederick Engels used the Iroquois as one of his main examples of early communism in the origins of the family, private property, and the state. In arguments about primitive communism, however, communism always refers to communal ownership, especially of productive resources. As we have already observed, many Native American companies can be seen as somewhat ambiguous in this sense. Women owned and worked the fields individually, even though they stored and disposed of the produce collectively. Men owned their own tools and weapons individually, although they generally shared the game and the loot. However, there is another way of using the word communism, not as a property regime, but in the original sense of from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. So, from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. There is also a minimal communism that applies in all circumstances. The feeling that if another person's needs are great enough, say they are drowning, and or that the cost to meet them is modest enough, let's say it asks for directions or a light, then of course any honest person would comply. This basic communism could even be seen as the very foundation of human sociability, since it is only bitter enemies that one would not treat in this way. What varies from society to society is the extent to which it is believed that this grassroots communism should spread properly. In many societies, and Native American societies of the day seem to be one of them, it would have been inconceivable to refuse a request for food. For the French of the 17th century, This was clearly not the case. The range of basic communism seems to have been very narrow. It certainly did not extend to food and lodging. Native Americans were therefore outraged by their behavior. So the American Indian they were outraged by the behavior of the French, of Western society. And there it breaks down some definitions for you of communism. The original sense, from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. So whatever it is you're able to do, that is what you provide. And whatever it is that you need, that is what you are given. No questions asked. It was inconceivable to refuse a request for food. You only did not treat others this way if they were a stranger or an enemy. Basic needs being met. Okay, this final thing I want to bring up is from an article called The Myth of the Barter Economy. I don't want to get too into that concept right now, but the basic idea is that there's this common belief that throughout much of human history, there was the barter system, and that was the prime way people interacted with each other when it came to resources before money. And this basically says that's not the case. There's no evidence that bartering was a major system of an economy, that was a primary system of an economy. There's no example of that. If it did happen, it was very small scale. And that barter actually came after money. Barter happened between people who were used to money. And then the idea of money came about also in a different way than what we think. And David Graeber is a part of this article also. Again, rest in peace. Brilliant man. I suggest listening to some of his talks. He has a talk on bullshit jobs. I believe he also has a book. He also has a book about the first 5,000 years of debt. Very knowledgeable. History is important, and he's a great source of history. So this will go into gift economies again. No example of a barter economy, pure and simple, has ever been described, let alone the emergence from it of money, wrote Cambridge anthropology professor Caroline Humphrey. All available ethnography suggests that there never has been such a thing. So if barter never existed, what did? Anthropologists describe a wide variety of methods of exchange, none of which are the 2 cows for 10 bushels of wheat variety. Communities of the Iroquois Native Americans, for instance, stockpiled their goods in longhouses. Female councils then allocated the goods, explains Graeber. Other indigenous communities relied on gift economies, which went something like this. If you were a baker who needed meat, you didn't offer your bagels for the butcher's steaks. Instead, you got your wife to hint to the butcher's wife that you two were low on iron. And she'd say something like, "Oh, really? Have a hamburger. We've got plenty." Down the line, the butcher might want a birthday cake or help moving to a new apartment, and you'd help him out. On paper, this sounds a bit like delayed barter, but it bears some significant differences. For one thing, it's much more efficient than Smith's idea of a barter system, since it doesn't depend on each person simultaneously having what the other wants. In Smith, they mean Adam Smith. Adam Smith, essentially the founder or the main influencer of classical economics, essentially our economic system of today. Adam Smith, huge influence for what we are currently in our economic system. Simultaneously having with the other ones. It's also not tit for tat. No one ever assigns a specific value to the meat or cake or house building labor, meaning debts can't be transferred. And in a gift economy, exchange isn't impersonal. If you're trading with someone you care about, you'll inevitably also care about her enough to take her individual needs, desires, and situation into account, argues Graeber. Even if you do swap one thing for another, you are likely to frame the matter as a gift. Trade did occur in non-monetary societies, but not among fellow villagers. Instead, it was used almost exclusively with strangers or even enemies, where it was often accompanied by complex rituals involving trade, dance, feasting, mock fighting, or sex, and sometimes all of them intertwined. So, there you have it. Once again, the idea of it was inconceivable to refuse to give someone food if they needed it. I'm low on iron. Really? Here's a burger. And that is an idea that seems inconceivable to us today. That entire economies were based on that type of model. So I'll leave you with that. Merry Christmas. Enjoy your gifts. Those who are unable to have gifts, like a lot of other fortunate people, keep them in mind. The education, the awareness, the fight to change the system is a fight for those people who were unable to obtain gifts this year, last year. And as we think of our fortunes and misfortunes, if we really want to subdue the suffering of the world, we must educate ourselves. We must fight. It takes effort to get out of this. And we do it for those who are less fortunate. So, Merry Christmas. Remember, another world is possible. Another world has existed. And let's fight to bring a desirable vision for all of us. Peace.